Welcome to the FGV podcast. My name is André Alves. I'm a professor here at FGV in the Department of Industrial and Operations Management. I also research innovation in the Innovation Research Center, FGV In. And today we're welcoming Bill Maloney, that is a keynote speaker at our BALAS Conference 2024. It's an honor to have Bill here. He is the chief economist of Latin America in the World Bank and has very important research and some very good ideas and explanations of challenges in Latin America for bringing about innovation. I personally met Bill in 2018. I was in the Jupiter Society in Korea, and I watched one of his lectures about something he calls the innovation paradox that influences Latin America. I came from a background of research and PhD in the shipbuilding sector, which I call it an experiment that we had in Brazil, where all policies were worked around towards building such industry, and we saw a huge movement up and then went down, which makes us ask questions of why certain policies don't seem to work, what are the gaps, what are we missing here, and I think Bill has some very good ideas and explanations for us to discuss, and it's an honor to have him here at this podcast. So thank you very much, Bill.
Muito obrigado, André. Thanks for the invitation.
Very interesting conversation. So Bill, what is the innovation paradox referred in your book, and what happens in Latin America?
So the idea behind the innovation paradox is that the returns to innovation of all different kinds, adopting technologies, doing R&D, whatever, should be much higher than in advanced countries. Why is that? Because advanced countries need to invent at the frontier, and that's very costly. We can adopt existing technologies with much less R&D. So in theory, we can get a much bigger bang, a much higher return to our innovation efforts than at the advanced countries. And in fact, for Europe, we see that the further countries are from the frontier, the higher the estimated rates of return to innovation. If you just extrapolate that mindlessly to developing countries, the rates of return should be extremely high because we're further and further from the frontier. And yet we find that developing countries do far less innovation than the advanced countries, which is exactly the opposite of what you would expect. And so that's the paradox. Mm-hmm. And we approach it by saying, well, maybe the rates of return to R&D or to innovation aren't as high as a simple extrapolation would make you think. Mm-hmm. And then we go into what it is that may be reducing those rates of return.
And it's really a paradox, because here we're always thinking about investing, putting more money into research and development, and really keeping up with the state of the art. On the other hand, what happens is oftentimes the level of capabilities that you find within economic agents, meaning firms, industries, and individuals, per se, they're not in that frontier to fully capture the possibilities that technological innovation can bring, which creates a cost to it. And one of the things that you mentioned in your book, which is related to what we do here at FGV EAESP, is management, right? So lacking managerial skills is key in these countries to explain why we're unable to adopt this technology. So can you explain a little bit more about that?
So when we look at why the rates of return to innovation might be lower, we argue that we have to look beyond the customary innovation system that we think about, for instance, in a place like Sweden or the United States, where mostly we're concerned with resolving market failures and appropriability or coordination failures, to the broader national innovation system, which includes, as you mentioned, management, but also a whole range of very boring and basic elements of the enabling environment. And let me just give you an example. So supposing we know, or we suspect, that in the best of all possible worlds, the rate of return to R&D would be 100% in Brazil, let's just say. So the government puts aside a couple $1 million to do research and development. First, we have to say, do we have the right scientists who are well trained so that we will get a good idea? Mm-hmm. Okay. Then the next step is exactly what you were just mentioning, is if we come up with a fantastic idea, do we have the entrepreneurial capabilities to take that idea and generate value added in the economy? And that usually involves a lot of the development part of research and development, and it takes many years. Mm-hmm. But even then, let's suppose we have the best entrepreneur in the world. That guy says, okay, to make this policy work, to make this idea work, I need credit for 5 years. Okay, well, financial markets aren't deep enough, so I can't get that credit. But let's suppose he can get the credit. Then he says, okay, now I want to import the following machines. Oh, well, there are problems getting that across the border, or there are lots of, we're not as open to trade as we might be. But supposing I get those machines, now I need to get very qualified workers. Again, 30% of Latin American firms say they can't expand for lack of qualified workers. Okay, so you can immediately see that with all these steps, we might not have as high a rate of return as we might have initially expected. Now, this management issue becomes central because those are the guys who are going to take an idea or recognize an idea. I mean, fundamentally, we think of technology transfer as very important, and in fact, studies by Komen and Mestieri and other people have said, look, under a reasonable model, the fact that Latin America has trouble adopting technologies from abroad, and we can talk about that historically and contemporaneously, is due to the fact that people transfer technologies, and they have to have both the technical capabilities but also the managerial capabilities to recognize a project, to evaluate the risk involved in that new technology, manage that risk, and take a 10-year horizon to implement it. That requires a set of skills which are often very scarce. So part of why I thought the Balos conference was important is because we're speaking precisely about those issues to people who study that.
Great, very good. And also, when we speak about this idea of building capabilities, you have a graph in your book that shows the steps from basic until more advanced. And what I can see from some experience in looking at entrepreneurs here in Brazil and well managed companies is that these basic managerial problems, they are pretty much solved, which means that there are lots of opportunities to be explored in the basic level in terms of bringing efficiencies to the system and so on. For instance, like applying lean methods. I teach, I have a course called Lean Innovation, so I talk about lean thinking and a lot about these new startups that are coming up. You can clearly see that there are like a lean mindset to it, which is just making things more efficient, even despite of actually using new technologies. It's really on the organizational level first, and as you solve that, and that most of the time you can actually get 40% increase, 50%, or double your production just by applying the simple tools. That is already an advance, and it is in itself some, I would say, organizational technology or something like that. Then to explore other aspects. So the question is, what are some strategies, potential strategies to address this innovation paradox in the developing countries?
So let me start. You made two very important points at the beginning. The first point I mentioned is, even though we tend to think, okay, we want to increase productivity, and we immediately go to the very exotic R&D, we have to be an AI, But there's a huge amount to be gained by simply making our firms better with some basic things. And I mean, the Japanese know this. The whole Kaizen method is like small incremental gains.
Yep.
And occasionally you have a breakthrough with some big new product and coming out of R&D. But so much of that approach is just slow improvement of how firms function. And often, and it's one of the graphs I showed, people just don't know that there's a better way of doing things. Mm-hmm. I had a case in Colombia of this female-owned firm that you could eat off the floor. I mean, the floor was meticulously organized and it was great, but they were carrying way too much in inventories. Mm. And the minute you point out, look, the opportunity cost of carrying that many inventories is like huge. And you could, the next week we came back and they've reduced their inventories. So there's a lot of progress to be made on those very basic technological capabilities, they're very basic managerial capabilities that I'm not sure are all that widespread. In the Colombian case, the SMEs had a lot of work to do in that realm. But the second thing you point out is that there are different levels of managerial capabilities, and that's what we're trying to get to with the innovation, with the managerial escalator, capabilities escalator, because even once we organize the plant floor and we organize our human resources and we figure out, the finances and all the basic stuff, to actually move from there to doing an R&D project is actually, it's quite a jump, because all of a sudden you're talking about taking a 10-year horizon and managing a very risky project. So you have to look around the world for the best technology to adopt. Yeah. Then you have to figure out what adaptations have to be made to your context. Yeah. And then you have to, come up with a plan and implement over a long period of time. Yeah. That's a different set of strategic of skills, right? That come in, and that's why we made it an escalator. And you can see it in reality in terms, for instance, in both Japan and in Singapore, where they have, or Spring in Singapore, where they have a gradation. Right? As firms move up and become more sophisticated, you find a different set of extension services that help them improve. And I think we have to think of it that way. First thing is get our SMEs and everything to know how good they are, to benchmark them, just to eliminate that information asymmetry, and then become more sophisticated. Now, your broader question, which is what do we do to get out of the paradox? I mean, that's a much larger question, because it's not only that managerial capability story we're working with. We're working with the entire enabling structure that firms work in. I mean, and this is what you want to avoid, that somehow by sinking a lot of R&D and tripling R&D or something, that we're suddenly going to grow a lot. Well, not unless we facilitate, make the financial sector work better, ensure we have a trained workforce, ensure it's easy to do business in the system. All these boring things that we've been talking about in the World Bank for several decades, that all needs to be done as well. That's part of the greater innovation system. And without that, we're not going to get the rates of return to good ideas and everything, even if we did have better managers and all. So it's a much broader project of raising productivity in the society as a whole and making it so we can better realize the opportunities that are coming our way.
Good. And also, when we think about strategies and how to innovate, there's always a discussion between top-down policy, bottom-up strategies, and so on. And when I was a student of business 20 years ago, I remember there was a slogan saying, think globally and then act locally. It was like famous. Everybody was repeating that. And when I lived in the Silicon Valley during the PhD as well, what I found over there was kind of like the opposite. They were thinking about local problems, local issues, sometimes simple issues, and then becoming global and acting globally, right? So I think in countries like Latin America, we have so many possibilities based on sometimes really simple, efficient things that need to be solved, that are not solved yet, that I think brings opportunities for people that really want to make a change and become an entrepreneur and try to, get one problem, fall in love with that problem, and then try to figure out how to do that in an impactful way. And so there's this element of bottom-up strategies is extremely important. So is it possible, if at all, to integrate in some way like policies and bottom-up strategy, or in what extent oftentimes policies go wrong?
So so I think both things have to happen. What would be nice, as I mentioned in the talk, Latin America undertrades in general, and it's very interesting. We're a little bit ensimismados, and we have access. Many countries have free trade agreements with the United States, but don't exploit them as much as they could, right? So I think there is a global mindset which you do want to inculcate more and have people think, if I can get this idea in shape and get the production efficient and all, I can really be global. I think we would like a little bit more of that to Latin America. And the government can help with that. There are a whole bunch of market failures. It's difficult to enter the European market or the US market. And there are network effects there, and there are coordination effects that the governments, if they're behaving efficiently, can help with. That said, the ideas and the generation of new industries really has to be pretty bottom up. And not only that, you need to have these technological and entrepreneurial capabilities that we're talking about to generate that bottom-up activity, that dynamism. And if we attempt to sort of create industries from nothing without ensuring that we have that kind of capabilities from on the bottom, then it's not going to work. And I think when we look back in the history of Latin America, we spent a lot of time putting up tariffs and barriers to competition with the idea that we would learn, that we would automatically gain those competencies, those capabilities, and then we could go on and take on the world. It didn't happen that way. The learning doesn't happen automatically. And so I think we need to be a little bit more deliberate and thoughtful about how we go about accumulating those capabilities and helping firms get them.
So you published your book in 2017, and are there any successful examples of developing countries overcoming the paradox, or we haven't seen that yet?
No, I think there are. I think China, for instance, well, I think it has a lot of structural problems that it's going to need to overcome in the next decades. They were very clear that the role of foreign direct investment, for instance, and the role of technical R&D and all, was to learn, was to catch up to the frontier, the technological frontier. They want to do it for reasons of national pride. They want to do it for defense reasons. They want to do it for any number of reasons. But the goal was to get to that technological frontier. And it's very clear that sometimes in Latin America, we look at FDI as a source of jobs or as a source of taxation. They very clearly saw it as a mechanism for learning and getting to the technological frontier. And they've done it in many sectors. They have a very competitive electric car. We see it all over Latin America now. Their supercomputing machines are at the frontier. There are several sectors. The economy as a whole, I'm not sure is particularly efficient, but they've been able to take advantage, to figure out how to take advantage of this gap between the frontier and where they were. I'd also say that although we don't think about Norway as being a developing country, before 40 years ago, it was looked down on in Scandinavia as kind of being the poor cousin. They discovered oil and gas, but what they did with it was exactly to leverage it for learning. They found foreign partners and said, look, we want your help in extraction, but we want to learn in the process, And we also want to take these other industries that we kind of have. They had a latent telecommunications industry, and they had a shipbuilding industry, and we want to retrofit that to this. And as a result, now they have a very dynamic shipbuilding industry and platform industry for difficult waters, for whatever you call it, difficult seas. And they have a Norwegian School of Petroleum Exploration, which uses all sorts of technologies. But again, there was a deliberate engagement with the multinationals that had the technologies. Like, we want to learn. Mm-hmm. We want to get to the frontier. And they did it. But it's, again, a very deliberate, we have to make sure that the overall ecosystem is amenable to this, or at least find ways of solving problems that would block the returns from this kind of learning, and then a very deliberate learning strategy from interacting with it.
Great. And capabilities to be grown and possibilities open for learning also requires some degree of institutional stability, I think, right? Also, besides learning, are there other factors that you see there are key for to foster innovation in these emerging markets, and what are some challenges that we have in this realm?
So again, I can't overemphasize the importance of having a stable and reasonably efficient enabling environment. The gains that Latin America has made in the last 30 years in terms of macroeconomic stability cannot be taken for granted. To begin there, the professionalization of central banks and ministries of finance has led us to the point where we're not as volatile as we were 30 years ago. Inflation is right now below the OECD average. That kind of context is absolutely critical, because when we're talking about technology adoption, be it managerial technologies or more scientific technologies, these are 10-year investments, right? And you have to have an environment which is predictable. Mm-hmm. And this also implies that innovation policy on the part of the government needs to take a 30-year horizon, right? And there needs to be consensus on the part of the various parties about where we want to go. And you see that, to use the example of Finland, every parliamentarian who's elected has to take a course in the Finnish model of innovation, okay? They have to get, okay, this is the program. This is what we are, we think is going to work for us. We don't know what the next Nokia is going to be, but these institutions we've set up are designed to help surface new Nokias, new ideas, and this is how we support it. This is our plan. And everybody's on board, and it works. That kind of, we have a problem in Latin America of the lack of coherence of our innovation ecosystems. We tend to not spend a lot on innovation-related activities, and it's very fragmented among many different ministries. Like in one country I was working on, there are 3 different ministries that were subsidizing patents. It's like, okay, is that how we should be spending our resources? And do we ever reach the massa critica with that? And the answer is, I don't think so. So, getting a greater coherence there in the ecosystem and taking a longer horizon, I think is key.
Yeah, and long-term view, coherence, that takes a lot of also trust building, right, between economic agents and everybody to get this consensus, and I suppose also that requires some level of coordination and management skills, negotiation skills to reach that, and we might have some challenges from policy to the industry, but it's really necessary to do that, because otherwise there is we call it in Brazil the chicken flight, right? So if flies, it goes a little bit and then flies a little bit and then goes down, and how to overcome that. There is a lot of trust building to be made. There is, I think, I'm not sure if it's in the World Bank, but there's a graph that shows GDP per capita versus how individuals trust them, their partners, and Brazil is like in the lower end. So we need to build trust as a country. We need to build trust with each other. We have to have this long view and look for ways to build capabilities to innovate. That's the only way possible, and I hope we find some path in that.
I absolutely agree with you, and of course there's this famous Nordic social capital that we always talk about, but I don't want to overemphasize that. I'll come back to it in a second. But the long view is important because these things are a lot harder than we think. Mm-hmm. So there's a new literature on industrial policy and missions and stuff like that, and I think it's good that countries get together and think about what our mission, what projects can we work on that we're going to devote our energies to, and it helps focus the mind. That's all great, but we have to be careful to understand that doesn't short circuit suddenly all of these building of capabilities we're talking about. We're talking about 30% of firms in Latin America saying they can't expand because of a lack of qualified labor, and we have just frankly the dismal performance of public education systems across the region. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's just no way of advancing unless you look at the Asian model. They built human capital. Yes, there's industrial policy, but massive investment in human capital at all levels. There's no way around that. Mm-hmm. There's no way around improving our infrastructure. There's no way around making our business processes and getting, reducing the costs of doing business lower. There's no way. And someone simply saying, "Oh, we need a mission," is renaming a problem, mm-hmm. but it's not. And so all of these things are, of course, for instance, fixing public education in the region. There's a 20-year program. Mm-hmm. That's part of the problem. No government is going to be around when kids' scores increase in 20 years. It's politically a difficult thing to do, but that's why we precisely need to take this long horizon and get sort of an agreement among society about the things we need to do if we're going to be competitive, and we need to do that.
Great advice. And any advice for management schools on this realm? What can we do to get a sense of the need for leadership, the need of long view, the need about looking, take responsibility really about the role that managers can have within companies to actually even produce a better society.
So we could talk about this for hours, but I think there's this interface of technology, of management, and of the firms on the ground, right? That is critical to foster, and it's often the case that we're getting this lack of articulation between the technical and administrative parts of universities and the private sectors. If you look at Latin America, we're tied for last with Africa, with co-patenting between the private sector and universities. And if you look at, I think, the collaboration, reported collaboration between universities and the private sector in Latin America is low by global standards. Yeah. And we can't afford that. We need to ensure that there's a greater dialogue and that a lot of the R&D resources that our government spend, and Brazil spends a fair amount, actually wind up in projects which are likely to help or likely to spin off to have private sector implications, add value. The link between technology and administration and management is we need to maintain tightly, because the new industries are high tech. Yeah. Right? So it's great we have a couple economists and they tell you stories about efficiency, but the guys who actually know how to build stuff and build, that's that technology. So we have to be sure that link is strong. And on the other hand, the engineering departments need to help give their students the skills to start businesses. Yeah. And hopefully, again, we can have an integrated structure where The university helping with curriculum and with skills, and then the overall ecosystems helping with financing and guidance.
Thank you very much. That was my last question. Thank you very much, Bill. It was a great conversation.
Well, thanks very much.
Great speech earlier today, and I hope you come back to Brazil many times.
No, thank you very much for the invitation.